I've spent way too much time thinking about the intro for this one, and still couldn't figure out anything witty. Some things are just really straightforward in the role and design. And Cleric class in Tactics Ogre Reborn is one of those things. But that does not mean I will not ramble about that class for unnecessarily large amount of time. So strap in and let's talk about healing a little. In most cases, it's really hard to make healing a thrilling activity in the game. The act is more of a maintenance than anything else, and not exactly exciting. Especially in a turn-based setting. Unfortunately, I cannot say that Tactics Ogre Reborn solved the issue, but at least they gave the Cleric some more toys to play around with. This time let's start with stats. Similar to Wizard or Enchantress, you can recruit any number of Clerics at any shop. Generic units of this class start with 75 RT, and they have slow movement type with range of 3, with minimal gem focus. In that aspect they are very similar to our basic offensive spellcasters. This also means that they suffer with the same mobility constraints. Clerics, however, do not have the same tools for counteracting them. But before we reach that point, let's take a quick look at Cleric's spells options in more detail. The first spell on the list is Exorcism, one of the more common tools to deal with undead enemies. For most of the game, the ability is restricted to Clerics, and that gives them a very specialized tool for very specific enemy types. There's nothing wrong with that, but due to the limited selection of spells available during battle, this one is really situational and slotted only when needed. The same can be said about the second level of the spell, which is basically only an AoE version of the effect. Range is not great, but since both of those are cleanup tools, this is not exactly a problem. Dealing with stilled and dead units is a necessary niche, but still a niche. So this does not exactly land in the build diversity category. Some classes needed to have this ability, and Cleric had a lot of free space in their design. Now, the next one on the list is something that can be categorized as mandatory inclusion on basically any Cleric loadout. Boon of Swiftness is probably the best support spell in the game. For 45 MP and 19 RT, it can apply Quicken to chosen target. And as I mentioned in my buffs and debuffs video, that's almost broken. Range of 5 allows us to easily reach other allied units with ease, and this will be the spell you'll probably use the most while playing the game. Moving on to this spell. This is a really strange case. By the description, this one should be very useful, and you should really try to squeeze it into your loadout. But the reality states otherwise. Enemy scripting prioritizes dealing damage over everything else, so there's almost no buffs on enemy units. In my around 600 hours with this game, I never used this spell in combat. My gut feeling tells me this shouldn't happen, but the facts say other things. But I actually used Awaken a few times. Sleep and Charm can be applied by quite a few damaging attacks, so there are edge cases for this spell, but not on Cleric. And that's because Cleric also has access to Ease, which not only deals with everything that can be covered by Awaken, but all other debuffs in the game. It's the better option for any class that can slot the spell. Of course, as soon as you get access to Ease 2, the value skyrockets. AoE debuff clear is actually quite nice for damage mitigation in fights with a lot of AoE spells that apply elemental averse debuff to many units at once. Those are, however, quite rare, so both spells land on the very situational shelf of the Cleric spell set. And it's finally time to talk about Heal, the most iconic spell for any Cleric. In this game it comes with 4 levels, each one increasing the mana cost, RT cost and amount of HP healed. Seems pretty straightforward, right? The twist here comes with the healing scaling. It's basically non-existent. The basic modifier stands at astonishing 0.05 of unit mind value, so plus 5 points of healing for each 100 points of character's mind, unless the unit has light elemental affinity. In that case, the rate goes up to 0.15 of mind. So a whooping plus 15 per 100 mind of caster. This can tell us one thing. Design of the healing spells is not targeted towards healing target to full from low HP. It's more of a spot heal that is used to bring the target to the safe amount of HP or to top HP off during the parts of battle with low pressure. That may be a little bit unintuitive, but as the time you spend in the game increases, the more natural this thing becomes, especially when we take a look at more advanced classes. But putting the tangent aside, I need to mention an outlier. Heal 4 has a base healing value of 25% of target maximum HP, which makes it probably the only healing spell that has some use while healing monster units with their absurdly large base HP pools. Okay, moving on to the AoE healing spells. Cleric has access to 3 levels of major heal. As you may notice in the background footage, I have access only to 2 of them. The reason for that is very simple. Major heal 3 is a low percent drop from enemy on a single map in a post-game dungeon, and I just didn't bother to grind for it, since at this point I wasn't exactly using this in my strategies. But that aside, major heal at all levels is probably the most optimal ways of restoring large amounts of HP in the game. First level can hit up to 5 targets, level 2 can heal up to 13 units in a single cast. Of course, this requires some foresight and good positioning, but if you want to do this, keeping your whole party alive with only one cleric is actually quite useful. But if someone in your party falls to damage, cleric also have tools for that. Resurrect and Resurrect 2 revives the incapacitated ally with 25 or 50% respectively of their max HP and MP. They have colossal MP cost, abysmal range, and huge RT cost attached to them. Those values are so bad that I honestly would advise you to use item-based resurrection instead of those two. And with that we reach the end of Cleric's spell list. As you may have noticed, it is not exactly full of hard choices that compete for your spell slots. There's one must-have, a few options for utility, and generic healing spells. Let's leave the spell situation at that, and look at skills available for Cleric. The list is also very short. We have a few usual suspects that you can remember from Wizard and Enchantress breakdown, starting from weapon skills and insight. Since Cleric can deal damage only against undead, equipping weapon skills is not exactly as useful as it is on other classes. The same with insight. There's no way to channel those MP into something other than buffs or healing. So, the first ability that actually deserves some attention is Sanctuary. It is a surprisingly complex ability despite the simplicity of the effect. It prohibits entry to the specific tiles near the cleric for undead units. At first glance, this looks like a nice defensive ability that protects your healer from undead. But you can actually use this as a powerful crowd control tool. Cleric can use this to cut access to your ranged units, funnel enemies towards tanks, or even totally block some passages on the map. Of course, the usefulness of this depends on map layout and enemy composition, but I find this to be probably the most interesting part of Cleric's skillset. Resist Petrify and Resist Charm have the same level of importance on Cleric as they have on Wizard, so basically non-existent. And from those two we move to something actually useful and powerful. Recruit can add an enemy human unit to your army. Chance of success depends on proximity, enemy HP, and their loyalty level. You can think about this skill as a sort of execute ability. It can effectively remove low HP enemies from the battle while giving you additional allied units. Not to mention, after the encounter you'll receive the unit's equipment, and at various points in the game your enemies will have access to much better gear options than you. It is still situational, but you should really pay attention to possibilities that this skill gives, especially in the early game. Seraph Pact, on the other hand, is much less useful. Divine units are really scarce, you can easily forget about this one. The same goes for Absolution. It is a direct counter to Condemn ability that shows up at the end of campaign and in the Palace of the Dead. It just allows you to use resurrection magic and items after the enemy disabled it with Condemn. I could be persuaded that this can be used as an MP drain for those bosses that waste their MP on Condemn, but that's a very sketchy argument. I'm almost sure that I never used the skill. Now, with the mostly useless ones already behind us, time to focus on actually useful ones. Cleric, as expected, also has access to Meditate auto skill. He's even supercharged in the terms of acquisition, gaining Meditate 4 at level 25. With this, it is quite possible to cast Boon of Swiftness on Cleric's first turn, and just snowball from there. Mother's Mercy is another great auto skill that quickly shows up in the Cleric skillset. It has 50% base chance of activation and removes all the debuffs from the unit. That enables Cleric to safely deal with debuffs on other allies, and this also counts at level 25. And finally, we have Mother's Blessing. Available quite early at level 12, it's another great auto skill. It has 25% chance of activation and doubles the effectiveness of healing done by the next divine spell cast by the unit. If you combine this with AoE healing spells, the singular turn of Cleric can quite easily restore absurd amounts of HP to your team. Unfortunately, that's everything that game gives to Clerics. It isn't exactly a plethora of options, but hey, it's a basic class that has very focused design. And it's time to have a quick look at the example loadout for battle. This time I'll show you it on my most recent playthrough save file. Spell choices for generic battles are quite simple. I have the strongest single target and AoE healing spells at my first two slots, so we have a spot healing and AoE sustain covered. Third spell slot is reserved for Boon of Swiftness. The more units you have quickened in your party during the battle, the better. Slot number 4 is my utility slot. Usually I run Ease here to deal with some annoying debuffs like Fear or Breached. But depending on the encounter, this can be swapped to Exorcism. Now time for skills. And well, there's not much to talk here about either. This time, first slot serves the utility role. For now, I'm running Cudgels here. We're not dealing any damage, but weapon skills also offer small damage mitigation against enemies that use matching weapon types. So if we're hit by a spell that is boosted by the enemy casters running Cudgels in their skill loadout, our defense boost from matching weapon skill will reduce that. It's not much, but it can be difference of surviving 2 AoE nukes instead of just 1. And if the Cleric is alive, a major heal combined with Mother Blessing can patch up a lot of units. You can easily swap this for Insight, Sanctuary, or Recruit if you want. The other 3 slots are however almost set in stone. Meditate is an auto-include on most spellcaster builds, and this one is not an exception. First few turns are dedicated to spamming Boon of Swiftness on critical units, and after that the gameplay is mostly spot healing and reapplying buffs. Mother's Mercy deals with occasional silence or elemental averse debuff and allows you to focus on keeping the rest of the party alive. The most annoying part of this setup is actually timing procs of Mother Blessing with healing spells. It is not only the best value in terms of raw HP healed per MP point, but also with overall healing per turn. With the loadout that's basically 3 auto skills and a full suite of non-damaging spells, Cleric is probably the best unit to gobble up auto skills buff card. If you have Meditate and Mother's Blessing proccing turn after turn, you'll get virtually unlimited healing. But there's not much else to do. Unfortunately, Cleric in Tactics Ogre Reborn is very streamlined and focused. Options are limited, but efficient, and there's not much you can do to change that. I'll end my ramblings at that. Writing this script was much harder than I anticipated, mostly due to my attempt to make this topic at least somehow interesting. It got me an idea for an entirely different video, but you'll have to wait for that one for some time. For now, you can do those boring engagement things like liking and subscribing. It looks like I'm on the way to having a cut from the ads that YouTube sometimes puts on my videos. And I wouldn't mind that at all. See ya in the next one.